everybody. My name is Sal Massoud. I'm chairing subcommittee number 3, and Annette is not able to attend. But I guess the first item, that's the welcome, and then we go into the second item. Has everybody reviewed the minutes? Do I call that?
If I may, Sal, if I can just confirm, in addition to the subcommittee members that we do have, I do see Caroline Donnelly, but I just wanted to see, can anyone else identify themselves who are present? I know that Alderman Cantu from San Elizario is here. Is AECOM, can you let us know who's present from your team?
Yeah, this is Chris Wright. I'm here, Jeff Irvin. We've got Alejandra Marco, and I believe Brian Blaisdell and Gilbert Andujo should be on the call. Yep, I see Brian. I don't see Gilbert yet. Yep, it looks like Gilbert's there. Oh no, Gilbert's I guess not on yet. I think he'll be joining a little bit late. And we've got Lily Cartwright as well from AECOM.
Okay, great. And then let's see. So then, do we have Dr. Bora?
Yes, I mean.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. And then, do we have Gabe Duran? No, Gabe. Okay. I did see that Marvin Gomez was on. And then do we? Okay, that's everybody that I have from the last meeting, so that's why I was calling out the names. Is there anyone present? Ms. Donnelly, can you tell me again your what is your first name?
Carolyn.
Carolyn. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll get Carolyn. Anyone else?
Yes, John Gwynn from the Doña County Flood Commission.
Okay, Don Gwynn. Thank you. All right. Anyone else?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Padinar Krishna. I'm the Chief of the Engineering Services Division, USIBWC El Paso.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Do we have anyone else?
Yes. Good afternoon. This is Enrique Ornelas. I am the Assistant Area Operations Manager with IBWC.
Okay, Enrique Ornelas. Okay, great.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
this is for USIBWC. We have also Raymond Messier, our principal engineer.
Okay.
I saw.
Okay, great. We'll make a note of that as well.
Also, earlier I saw Marvin Gomez came up as a guest.
Yes, I do have Marvin.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So Marvin
Okay,
is actually my proxy. Gonzalo can no longer be, so Marvin's my proxy whenever that I'm not available.
Okay, great. I'll make that change. Yes. So we have Enrique and Marvin as your proxies. Is that correct, Isela? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so Sal, sorry about that. We'll go ahead and we can turn it back to you in terms of the minutes. And I'll just make a mention of which minutes they are because for some reason I had difficulty in getting these together since we had our first meeting. So they would be approval of the minutes from September 30th, October 22nd, and November the 10th.
Yes, we lumped them together because we had some technical difficulty, I guess, displaying them. But I'm assuming that everybody got copies and everybody reviewed them. And if anybody has any comments, let us know before we call it for a vote. So, do I hear a motion? Anybody?
Move to approve.
We have a motion, Zella. Need a second?
Second.
Who's this?
Is that Gilbert?
Gilbert.
Gilbert. Okay, we have a second from Gilbert. Anybody in opposition? Hearing none. Motion passes. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So you want to take over, Annette, and just move on different items?
Yes, so we'll go ahead and turn the presentation reins over to AECom. They're going to be covering all of the agenda items with the exception of the last two. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Let me just share my screen here. All right. So thank you all for joining us. We do have a long meeting scheduled here today. We'll try to wrap it up earlier if we can, but there's a lot to cover, and so we'll do our best to be as concise as possible, but still covering what we need to get done here. I hope you all had a good break. I know we enjoyed the time off, and we were able to get in the tech memo on January 7th. That was submitted to TWDB, and we should get comments back within about 30 days to confirm that everything is complete. And that would also be our notice to proceed for moving on to task 5, the recommendations portion. So we're looking forward to hearing back from TWDB on that, and thank you all for your comments, your reviews, and the voting of approval. We're glad that we were able to get that major milestone completed. So one of the first agenda items here is that we're going to review the FMEs and FMSs that were in that tech memo, and then we will go over some of the needs that we talked about in our last Subcommittee 3 meeting that was held, I think it was November 11th. Then we'll talk about some of the FMEs and FMSs that came out of those needs that were identified. If you recall that last meeting, we had stakeholders from different cities, the county, different counties. Hudspeth, El Paso County spoke, IBWC spoke. So we'll first kind of review some of the big issues that came up, and then we'll talk about the studies and the strategies that we formulated after reviewing those needs, and which were sent out in an email prior to this meeting. So you all should have had that Excel file that has those needs on there and the strategies. The fourth agenda item is we'll go over some of the FMPs that were derived from the City of El Paso and County of El Paso stormwater master plans. And the reason we'll be going over those FMPs is because we'll be considering using the remaining projects that weren't prioritized by the city and the county, and those may be converted into FMEs instead of FMPs, but that's something that we will discuss with you all. And next, we'll review the identified flood risks in areas outside of El Paso County, or not necessarily. Some of them may be in El Paso County, but just were not included in stormwater master plans. So we'll go over those, and we'll also review areas that are, sorry, I got a little mixed up here. So we'll address issues that were outside of the El Paso County that were brought up previously that we haven't really touched on too much yet, and that'll be dam safety and TxDOT roadway projects. And so that's what that agenda item will be covering. And number 6 is we're going to look at areas that that are also covered, the FMEs and the FMSs that might come out of those TxDOT and dam safety projects that we discussed. Sorry about that. And finally, we'll go over the priority issues that TWDB will be using as scorecards. They basically task the technical consultants to develop scores in certain areas, and so we'll be looking at those and seeing if there are any other studies and strategies that we've missed that could address some of those scoring criteria. And then at the end, we'll put everything up for a vote if there are any refinements to the list of FMEs and FMSs that we developed in the January 7th tech memo. Then we'll want to get approval for those refinements, which will then bring that recommendation to the next general RFPG meeting. And then lastly, we'll just talk about the next Subcommittee 3 meeting dates. So first, we want to talk about the current list of FMEs and FMSs from the January 7th tech memo. So this is actually a pretty comprehensive list. I don't want to go through every item on here. It would just, I think, slow down the meeting a little bit too much, but I'll touch on one or two of these. There were a total of 14 FMEs that were included in the tech memo. These were generated from discussions that we had in subcommittees. They were also developed from documents that we collected, that we found out about through our public survey. We were calling the different counties and floodplain administrators, county judges, to try to understand what their biggest flood issues were. And this is what came out of those discussions. If there wasn't an actual project that was already decided upon with parameters that could be included as FMPs, but we knew there was an issue that needed to be studied, then we put it in here as either an FME or an FMS. So just an example here is the develop and implement a sediment and vegetation control program in the Rio Grande and El Paso. That was one of our first meetings, subcommittee meetings, where we talked about the need for a hydrology assessment, updating the hydrology in the Rio Grande. There was a joint committee on Rio Grande flood project risk that developed a document which we kind of went through in detail, or at least the summary of that document, and it pointed to some sediment and vegetation issues that have to do with maintenance of the Rio Grande. So that was the study that came out of those discussions, and we'll be continuing to coordinate with the USIBWC on further defining, the scope of that study and what it might entail. If there are any of these studies that you all have questions about, feel free to speak up or interrupt if you have a question or wanted just more information. We can follow up afterwards if we need to, but basically this is just an opportunity to ask questions about any of these. If you were going through the tech memo and wanted to know more about where they came from, whose idea it was, or any additional details, please let us know here. These are the second half of the FMEs. One of the ones I was just going to highlight was number 13, which we'll talk about. I mentioned earlier in the agenda that we'll talk a little bit about dam safety. And so this particular FME was to evaluate improvements of dams within the region. There are 27 dams that TCEQ identified as hydraulically inadequate. So this is a study to address those concerns, and well, like I said, we'll talk a little bit more detail about that later. So any questions so far on any of these FMEs or the sources? I've added this source column on the right to say where they came from, which discussions with which entities they came out of. So that's something that's not included in the tech memo. I will note also that this sponsor has an asterisk by it, and the asterisk is explained in the tech memo. Basically, it's just our first shot at who might be the sponsor of each of these studies, and in no way, it makes it a requirement of that entity to be a sponsor. It's just starting out. This is who we assumed would be the sponsors, and we've had separate discussions with the IBWC about that. we want to make that clear. That's why one of the reasons we had an asterisk in there. This is in no way a commitment to any of these studies by any of these entities. So next, I was just going to talk about the FMSs that were included in the tech memo. We have, another one that has to do with IBWC is number one, the FEMA levy accreditation for all Rio Grande levies in El Paso. This was a high priority for a lot of the stakeholders we talked to, a lot of our subcommittee meetings, we mentioned this. So we're just, and I know we've had some preliminary meetings with EP Water and El Paso County on how we can coordinate to get these levies accredited as efficiently as possible. And that's going to start with deciding, or understanding what projects are in line in what order by the IBWC. And then the next steps will be coordinating with FEMA to get some of the mapping completed, and eventually the FEMA floodplain maps can get updated with the protection behind those levees once the levees become accredited. So that's just one I wanted to highlight here. Again, we've got the source column on the right, which shows who we discussed these with, where they came from. This is the second half. Again, there's 14 altogether FMSs that were in the tech memo. Just one that I'll highlight on this page is develop a regional strategy for sediment control, number 12. Sediment control on arroyos tributary to the Rio Grande in major irrigation drains and other waterways identified. So this was one that we talked about with Jeff Bennett, who is a member of this of the Upper Rio Grande Regional Flood Planning Group, and he's also connected with the Rio Grande Joint Venture. And this will be basically a strategy for prioritizing mitigation solutions for arroyos that might impair conveyance capacity, and that increases flood risk on the Rio Grande and the adjacent communities. So again, if there's any of these that you all have any questions about, feel free to raise the question now, or you can always follow up with an email later, and we can provide more information. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions or comments on these, I will go ahead and pass it off to Jeff, who is going to cover some of the needs in studies and strategies that came out of our last Subcommittee 3 meeting.
So in this agenda item, what we're going to do is we're going to go over briefly the summary that we made of the discussions we had on the flood experiences, primarily in 2006 and 2015. And the person we had leading the documentation of those discussions is Alejandra Marco from our El Paso office, and she's going to lead us through that discussion. And then she's going to pass it back to me to explain how we took those needs to basically put together a list of proposed FMSs and FMEs that we'd like you all to discuss and ultimately vote on inclusion or not, in the, at least at this point, at the end of this meeting. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Alejandra. And by the way, the tables you're going to see now were sent out on Monday afternoon, so hopefully you had some chance to look at some of the detail in the tables. On to Alejandra.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. So first of all, I just wanted to thank everyone that was involved in this documentation. On the next slide, we have a list of the review of the meetings that we've had and who was involved in gathering this information on our recent major storms. So first of all, I wanted to say that we were focusing on the 2006-2021 storms, and we had Enrique Ochoa representing, of course, Gisela Dagnino, and share his experiences, and he even shared a PowerPoint presentation of the flooding issues we had from the city of El Paso. And of course, Gonzalo Cedillos as well commented on those events as well. We had a separate meeting, several separate meetings actually, with Gilbert Saldana from the El Paso County, and we've got those in as part of our spreadsheet as well. Gabe Duran, also, we had his input from the Rio Grande. He's a former employee who was kind enough to share everything that is that happened during the flood events when he was part of it still. Also, we had Omar Martinez and Dr. Blair from the El Paso County Water Improvement District #1, and this becomes a stormwater issue during these big events when you know, the irrigation channels become part of the storm system. So we've had also input from them too. From Hudspeth County, we have Joanna McKenzie share some of the issues as well, and David Cantu via email, he shared some of the flooding issues. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, just kind of go over the spreadsheet that we've created and that we've been working on. Please let me know if you don't see my screen. I'm sharing an Excel spreadsheet right now.
We can see it.
Thank you, Gisela. So as you can see, this spreadsheet itemizes what we've been talking about. And of course, we have columns through items, and then the person who shared this experience with us. We have the flood year related to this event. Also, we were able to include the location or the areas, and we've somehow linked all of these descriptions of the rain events to our app, our online app, and they're digitalized also, most of them, or at least the most important ones. Also, we have a description of what happened as part of that item, and of course, all the needs are located. You can, I'm sorry, listed. So as you can see, maybe one item may have multiple needs, and this is something that you know, we discussed previously, but they're all color coded. So for your information, and this is something that we did so that we could summarize everything that could be coordinated through one need. And so you can see, like, the oranges are part of you know, IH10. They relate to IH10. Maybe the light gray, they're sediment related. The blue is erosion, and the dark blue is maybe how to address these questions. So also, I wanted to mention that we've, as I mentioned before, we have the person who shared these with us listed, Enrique Ochoa. And as I scroll down, you can see also that we have Gabe Duran's comments, Omar's comments, and Mr. Cantu's comments, Joanna McKenzie's, and Dr. Blair. So this is a helpful spreadsheet, and making it color coded can help us categorize them into one and summarize the information that we have in here. So if anybody has any questions on this spreadsheet or any comments, I'm opening the floor to that. Or if anybody wants to add anything, I can certainly do that.
Hi, Alejandra, this is Annette. Just,
Hi, Annette.
it might have just been on the presentation slide, but for Alderman Cantu, just to clarify, he is with the City of San Elizario, not Socorro.
Okay, we'll make that change.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Annette. Any other questions or comments?
This is Chris Wright. I was just going to clarify that none of the FMEs, FMSs from the tech memo that we included were coming straight out of these needs. But one thing that we'll talk about when we look at the studies and strategies is there is a little bit of overlap that some of these needs identified. So, but just to point that out, that this was not included in the tech memo in general. Those were from other sources.
Thank you, Chris. All right, so I am going to pass it along to Jeff and stop sharing my screen.
And I will start sharing mine. So actually, Chris, can you go on to the next slide in the presentation? I think it's in the presentation itself.
Yeah, let me just share my screen.
So what this table summarizes is that we've listed, I believe we have 8 flood management strategies that we derive from the needs, and reminding everybody that the flood management strategies are not location specific. They're more generalized strategies that apply to broader parts of the region. So based upon the discussions we had with the various folks in the previous meetings that Alejandra discussed, you can relate all these strategies back to the previous table by basically looking for the similar shading. So the strategies we came up with, the first one was to develop solutions to debris sediment flows from mountains and mesas. And based upon the experience, there was a series of 5 different parts that might be incorporated into a single strategy to address that particular issue. So when we define that strategy in the flood plan, we'll include all those issues.
Hey, Jeff, sorry to interrupt you, but I was just going to share the latest spreadsheet. I think you made a few refinements to this where you added some numbers. So this one's a little bit more updated. All right, it didn't paste in there very well. Let me try that one more time.
Well, I'll just share on my screen. That's the easiest way to do it. And this.
Yeah, I think that'd be better.
Yeah, let me just share. So let me can people see this? So basically the first strategy is develop solutions to debris sediment flows from mountains and mesas, and it includes refining the risk of sediment generation by arroyo, developing sediment basin design options, educating the public in needs to reduce sedimentation, investigating resilience of flood control dams for sediment control. That's basically to do some what ifs. We have debris come down from the mountains. Are the dams able to handle it? Identify the existing dams. Identify which of the arroyos should be controlled to reduce sediment into specific irrigation systems. So this one pops up specifically for the irrigation system in El Paso County and later on in Hudspeth County. Any questions on that particular strategy from anybody? If not, then I'm going to go on to the second strategy, which is develop design and design standard options for addressing identified development relating flooding in El Paso. These came out of the discussions that were had from the presentation by Mr. Ochoa. And they included evaluate the city and county drainage design standards for inlets for stormwater systems because water is bypassing inlets on some of the steeper slopes. Provide guidance on curb cuts that mitigate flow diversions. Sometimes we have planned diversions into detention basins that don't convey enough into the detention basins. Related to future development in El Paso, evaluation of the DDM to include additional requirements for on-site storage. And one of the side comments there was include addressing as-built elevations. And we'll get more detail on this from the city as we write it up. Another one was addressing existing development in El Paso, assess options to protect remaining on-site storage and recover the original storage, where we have planned on-site storage and developments, and it's being taken out of the system without any review. So basically, this is to look at the design standards and see if we can address some of the issues that came up in 2006 and 2015. Anybody have any questions on this one? Here on to the next one is develop regional solutions to address erosion issues in natural channels affecting stormwater conveyance. These were assembled from the different flood experiences. Erosion resistant design in order to prevent removal of material from parkways, control velocity coming down on channels to reduce erosion on concrete. Sometimes we have extremely high velocities that even concrete can't resist. And add energy dissipation structures, develop some more guidance on that issue, and educate the public on the need to basically be aware of this issue and be sensitive to it. Any questions on this particular issue? Fourth one is develop solutions to address city, county stormwater conveyance into the Rio Grande. How do we get water into the river? Refine agency action, coordination, and control of riverine and interior flooding. Pump stations and gate controls, basically put together some kind of operations plan that people can just specifically associated with that issue, getting water into the Rio Grande as part of the planning for future floods. Develop designs and costs for improvements of conveyance in the river terrace stormwater infrastructure and include addressing high groundwater. Some of the irrigation drains, which are forced to convey stormwater during a large event, have their capacity reduced by groundwater. Are there things that we can do in order to recapture that capacity in those drains? Integrate existing early warning into flood operations planning in the river terrace. We get information on early warning from the various agencies in charge of the river, but are we conveying them in the context of some action to the folks that need to know what to do based upon the future conditions? Design future early warning to improve flood operations in the river terrace. There may be a way to incorporate more combined understanding of what's happening in the watersheds adjacent to the Rio Grande, adjacent to the city and county of El Paso, that can be combined with the early warning we're getting on the river, and see if we can refine what we're doing based upon more detailed early warning. Anybody have any questions on that one? Develop solutions for flooding for the city of Presidio, and that'll involve multiple agencies. So it's not just a it's not just an evaluation, and it's more of a strategy. What are the different elements we can put together to help out the city of Presidio? More high-level discussion. The sixth one is develop integrated solutions to improve irrigation system, stormwater conveyance system interaction in the El Paso area. This is not necessarily associated with the Rio Grande, but there's a lot of flooding that can occur, for instance, up in the Mesa Drain, which affects properties adjacent to the Mesa Drain. This is to deal with where the drainage system actually becomes part of the flood protection system for the city. Any questions on that one? Develop multinational mitigation options for Rio Concho flooding. That was that's one that we put in there to basically be have the state of Texas paying attention to what's happening with the international negotiations associated with the Rio Concho. Any questions on that one? And assess risks of dam overtopping for selected regional dams. We had some circumstances happen in 2015 where some of the dams were threatened with overtopping, and private dams in fact did overtop. So is there something we can do to look for that situation and whether it might occur in the future? So those are the FMSs, and at the end of the meeting we're going to be talking about approving these 8 FMSs as additions to the ones that are in the tech memo. Does anybody have any questions about this that they want to ask before we eventually get to the voting? Okay. On to the FMEs. So the FMEs also derive from that table 1 that we already discussed. And again, the shading tells you, if you want to go back and figure out where this FME came from, what need from what storm it came from, you can track it back via the shading. Run through these quickly. The first one is to prioritize arroyos in the city of El Paso and their likelihood of producing sediment and debris flows. This is basically a study to use geology and hydrology and field investigations to basically say these particular arroyos are the ones that are the highest priority to address. Any questions on that one? Second one is to prioritize arroyos in El Paso County. El Paso County has a series of projects that address putting sediment basins on arroyos. It would be useful to know which one of those are likely to have sediment flows large enough to impair downstream basins. And then we added in a third FME dealing with Hudspeth County on the same issue based upon the presentation we had from Joanna. Any question on those? The next 5 are all derived from the issue, studies that are dealing with the issue of getting water from El Paso and El Paso County and Hudspeth County into the river. The first one is to develop risks in the city and county associated with varying levels of Rio Grande channel maintenance. If there's 2 issues with channel maintenance, one is the amount of sediment that's allowed to accumulate within the riverbed, which changes the hydraulics and the ability of the river to transmit the flows. And the second issue associated with that is the vegetation, which increases the roughness, which again increases the depth of the flooding. So basically provide the state of Texas some understanding of how that maintenance relates to the risks to the city and county of El Paso, and get that documented. Any questions on that one? Same issue on Hudspeth County, and the same issue dealing with Presidio and the flows that occur from the localized arroyos that affect conveyance in the Rio Grande. The fourth one, and this one is a mouthful. So basically, it's again trying to get a handle on the Rio Grande flooding. And again, it's not just a matter of flooding from the river into the city. It's a matter of the stage in the river affecting the ability to pump into the river from the river terrace, or how to get water out of the city and county into the river. And there are three things that we're talking about here, specifically at City of El Paso locations. Seeing how protection varies with city and county pump station capacity, see how it varies with varied river operation scenarios. There are conditions in the river where there's large amounts of storage in Caballo Dam, which increases their routine normal flows during the season, where they discharge more than occurs in normal years. How does that affect the ability of the city to handle floods during flood events that happen during the conveyance, during the growing season? And there's also buried in the hydrology associated with the Rio Grande a lot of historic assumptions associated with water getting out of the Rio Grande upstream of El Paso and providing storage, which slows down the flows. Those assumptions haven't been checked in recent times, and it's a good idea to basically see what the range of answers could be if we don't know the answer, and see how they affect the protection of the city and county of El Paso. All of these tie in directly to the FME1 that was in the tech memo. And then a plan for mitigation of drainage controls where groundwater reduces stormwater conveyance in the Montoya drain, specifically in the El Paso area. Anybody have any questions on any of these related FMEs? The next one is develop solution for IH10 flooding in El Paso. And these are 6 different issues, all of which I think are fairly clear, affecting IH10 flooding, and they would all be included in a broader development of a solution for preventing IH10 flooding in El Paso. And the last 4 of these are all associated with specific locations: Presidio, Fort Hancock, Sierra Blanco, San Elizario, localized flooding in San Elizario, sorry. That were all brought up in front of the flood planning group, so we're going to include them based upon that input as part of the FMEs that we'll recommend for the plan. Anybody have any question with these FMEs? Need to have any discussion before we vote on them? If not, I'm going to pass it back to you, Chris, for the next section.
Jeff, let me share my screen. right. 1 second here. Okay, so now we're going to go through this list of FMPs that were derived from the. Can you all see my screen? Okay. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you, Chris.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, for some reason I'm not seeing my screen being shared on my phone, but as long as you all can see it. The review list, I want to review this list of FMPs from the tech memo. We had a couple interviews with EP Water outside of the subcommittee meetings where we narrowed down some of the projects out of the Stormwater Master Plan to a smaller list of projects that we could evaluate as part of this regional flood plan. And we had similar meetings with El Paso County, and we included in the tech memo at the end, there's 2 tables which show that reduced list of projects from those 2 stormwater master plans. And these projects are listed in order of priority of which ones are most important to the city and most important to the county. We did have a meeting following what was produced for the tech memo and review of the tech memo. We had an additional meeting, like I said, with El Paso Water, where we reduced the list even further from what was in the tech memo. I believe there were 24 projects in that reduced list for the city of El Paso in the tech memo. And after a second meeting, we reduced that list to 15. And again, this is a list of priority because eventually, we're going to have to evaluate these FMPs for the regional flood plan, and we're going to be limited by our resources, by our budget, by our time. And so that's why it was important for us to get this list in order of priority from the city and the county, because we want to get through as many of these projects as we can to do the full evaluations. Now, the projects that aren't on this list, we have a couple options. Because this is the first cycle of the state flood plan, there is guidance from TWDB that states that you can include or recommend even projects, FMPs, in this first cycle without necessarily including all of the project data. And since there are so many projects within the El Paso Stormwater Master Plan and the county Stormwater Master Plan, we thought it might be beneficial to include all of them, but only evaluate this smaller subset based on our resources available. So then the question becomes, well, what do we do with those that aren't on this list? Do we include them as FMPs so that they will be in the flood plan and they'll be eligible for future state funding when new grant programs come out? That's one option. Another option is we include them as FMEs so that if grant funding becomes available for studies, we can apply, or the El Paso Water or the county can apply for those studies to be funded through the state flood plan. A third option is you could include them as both FMPs and FMEs. Is Richard Bagan here with us? I don't think he was there at the beginning, but we've submitted some questions to TWDB that we're hoping to clarify, this approach. But from previous general RFPG meetings and subcommittee meetings where Richard has been present, he did object to this idea of including these FMPs without submitting all of the information, all the required data, but but they would still be in that plan, and then they would still be eligible for that funding if those opportunities become available. One thing to keep in mind, and it's again, I know it's kind of in the weeds here, but if you include a project as just an FME and the funding becomes available from somewhere to get that study done, and that study is performed, and out of that study you get FMPs, you're not going to be able to apply for state funding for those FMPs unless they're in the state flood plan as an FMP. So in other words, if it's just in there as an FME, you can get funding for the study, but not for the construction. To get funding for the construction, you would have to then amend the regional flood plan and include it as an FMP to get funding for that construction. Is that clear? Are there any questions on that process so far?
Pretty clear. Thank you.
Sure, and I know it's confusing, and we're trying to get some more clarity, but we think that because this is again the first cycle, that this is an option available to us, so we want to take advantage of that. And so at this point, I just want to ask you all in the subcommittee: are there a preference on whether to include the projects that aren't in this prioritized list as FMEs only, or are we leaning towards including them as both FMEs and FMSs? Are there any comments or suggestions as to which approach we want to lean towards?
So I think you mean FMEs and FMPs.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I said FMSs. I meant FMEs and FMPs.
Again, there doesn't appear to be any downside to including them as both. Right?
So I say we include them as both, but Chris, the list that you have here, it's not the same one that we that I sent you after we had our discussion.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I apologize for that. We will update that immediately, and I know I'll have some minutes here after this section. I'll go through and try to clarify what happened there, but I apologize for that. We'll try and get this updated before the end of the presentation here. Kind of work on that in the background.
Okay. Yeah, but I don't see a problem of submitting them as both. I mean, if but I don't know what the rest of the group thinks.
Well, if there aren't any other comments at this point, we can set that as a potential action item. In I guess it will be kind of lumped into our vote at the end of this, where we choose to adopt the FMEs and FMSs, the refinements that we come up with in this meeting. We can alter that language in the vote to also incorporate this general decision that we want to include both of those, both as FMEs and FMPs. So we can vote on that at the end, and if anybody has any thoughts or reasons not to vote for that decision, then you have that opportunity at the end of the meeting. But for now, we'll go ahead and assume that that's what we'll do. If it's not on this list of priorities, and again, we'll update this list with the correct list of projects. I apologize that did not get updated correctly, but again, by the end of this meeting, hopefully we should have it right, and then we'll vote on that process to include them as both FMEs and FMPs. This is the county list, which was reduced from, I think there were 76 county projects, or maybe 67, sorry. And we reduced it down to 20. And one change that we made after the previous FMP meeting was to move this one, even though it was the highest priority. It looks like that's likely going to get funding for SOC 1 and SOC 2 through the TWDB. So, however, that's not final. It's not set in stone yet. So we didn't want to remove it from the list altogether. But I know Gilbert Saldana with El Paso County had mentioned that he did want to leave it on the list. So we kind of moved it to the bottom of the prioritization list for now. One other comment I'll make about this is that this list in particular, it does not include a project SOC4, which has to do with a sediment basin at the Mankato Arroyo. And that was an issue that was brought up by the EPC WID #1, the Irrigation District in El Paso. And we had not included that in our list of FMEs or FMSs because we knew that it was a county stormwater master plan project. However, since it didn't make it on this list, we wouldn't be evaluating it, even though that was one of the irrigation district's top priorities. So I would say, is Gilbert Saldana on this call today? I don't think he is.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, yeah, he is. There he is. Hey, Gilbert.
Yes.
Do you have any issues with amending this list to include the SOC4, which was the irrigation district's one of their top priority projects, so that your total list would be 21 projects from the county stormwater master plan?
No, not at all. I think, like you mentioned earlier, I think that SOC1 and SOC2 is very likely to just receive funding. So it'll probably just get dropped down to a total of 20 projects.
Okay, great. Yeah, that sounds good. Well, that's the only change that I was going to suggest on this list. And thank you again for that coordination to help come up with this prioritized list. Now these are the FMPs from the January 7th tech memo that were not included in City of El Paso or El Paso County stormwater master plans. There are 9 of them, so these are from other places within the region. Some of them still fall within El Paso. You can see the first 5 up here have to do with, this one is a water supply project that's in the state water plan. And all I'll say about this one is these are some projects that we're still exploring whether or not they should be included, whether they'll be recommended. I know that this one, the Rio Bosque Wetlands, the USACE project, it doesn't seem to have a huge flood benefit. This Riverside Regulating Reservoir, again, the flood benefit is something that we're going to be evaluating whether it'll stay in this list or whether it might just drop out altogether. But as we collect more information about these projects, we will see if there is enough information available, modeling available to fully evaluate them as FMPs. Otherwise, these will likely turn into FMEs instead of FMPs. So again, this will have the option here if we want to include them as both FMEs and FMPs. We can do that, or we can make them just FMEs. These ones, there's some of them, it might be a little bit less information available than what's in the stormwater master plan. So that might be sort of a case-by-case basis. But does anybody have any thoughts on these counties outside these projects outside the stormwater master plan, whether we want to follow that same approach or if these ones should just go straight into the FME pile if we don't have enough information to evaluate them?
Chris, for item number 1, what kind of information are you exactly needing, or what do we need to do to help you determine whether they stay as an FMP or move on to an FME?
So for item number 1, I think it's more of a question of would it have a flood benefit related to it? And I know that this one is tied to the Rio Grande and utilizing water that is available in the Rio Grande. that would otherwise go downstream and not get utilized in the area. I guess the question I have on this one is will it show enough flood mitigation benefits to score highly as an FMP? So I think this one we probably have enough information to where it wouldn't go into the FME category. It would just be a question of, would we want to recommend it? Because we just don't, whether we think it will score highly enough to be one of these that will be ranked. But we can talk offline if there's more information that we can gather that's related to the flood benefits. Then we can keep this on. But that's just a point I wanted to bring up, is that I know not all of these are directly related to flood benefits, flood mitigation.
I would appreciate it if we had a call after this. I just want to make sure that this project is as fundable as possible, and if not, what we have to do to make it fundable.
Right. Okay. That's a good conversation. We will definitely set something up to discuss that. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. Any other comments here on these projects? Any thoughts on if some of these just get converted to FMEs because there's just not enough funding available? Would anyone have any issues with that? I'm sorry, because there's not enough information available to model them as FMPs, or do we want to take the same approach as with the Stormwater Master Plan? Okay, well, with that, I'll kind of leave it. I'll leave it at that at this point. Like I said, we'll amend the language at the end of this meeting to vote on that topic. And we can vote on that separately.
So in terms of this meeting, Chris, we don't need to deal with whether they're FMPs. We only need to deal with whether they're FMEs, because that's all we're voting on. So we don't have to deal. Right. We don't have to deal with the issue on whether they're FMPs as part of this meeting. So the really issue is whether they should be FMEs, and I think all of these, because they're not. We don't have concept designs associated with these. There are
some that do have concept designs.
They have concept designs, but there aren't any of them.
There's varying levels of detail available for these.
Right, but there's none of them that have all the data required by the TWDB for scoring as an FMP, right? So they're all going to require at least varying levels of study in order to fill in the sheet of what's required for the data requirements of the plan, right? So I think all of them would have some level of additional evaluation before they become an FMP, or they can become an FMP, but they're all going to require some additional evaluation to get the data you need for the scoring for the plan. So I would say there's no downside to making them all an FME, unless we're just not going to do them.
Well, I think that's an option. I think some of these might have enough information to be just FMPs like these. I think it's going to be a matter of when we start evaluating them. If they don't have enough information to be FMPs, that's when they become an FME.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this offline. I think we're having a semantic discussion here.
Okay. Anybody from the subcommittee or stakeholders have any thoughts about this approach? All right, we'll leave it at that for now. We don't want to waste too much time on this issue, but it's something that, like I said, is still in flux, and we're still trying to coordinate with TWDB to understand if there are any issues with this approach of having both them as FMEs and FMPs. But just wanted to bring that up as a topic. It's an important discussion that a lot of the regions are having right now, and it's just something that we want to make sure that you all have the opportunity to weigh in on. So with that, for now, we'll leave it at that, and we'll get into some of the issues that are identified outside of El Paso County that have to do with houses, buildings that are within the floodplain. And for that, I'll turn it over to Brian Blaisdell.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone.
So Brian, we might give everybody a break. We've been going on for a little over an hour. If people want to go take a break, should we maybe take a 5-minute break and come back? Or it's up to the group. What do y'all want to do?
Yes, please.
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So let's just meet back at 3:15.
Thanks.
Okay.
Sal, do we need to get you some water? Do you want me to see if I can get some water over to you?
Water sounds good.
Okay, let me do that.
All right, it's a little after 3:15. Are you all, or I guess, sorry, 2:15 El Paso time, Mountain Time, 3:15 Central Time. Are you all ready to get going again? Anybody missing?
Ready to go.
All right, Brian, did you want to just share your screen presentation for this part?
Actually, can you share yours? If
Yeah, no
possible.
problem.
Okay, thanks. Okay, hi again, everyone. So far in this meeting, our focus has been on FMEs that were identified through past discussions with planning group and stakeholders. So for this agenda item, we wanted to talk about potential FMEs that come from our desktop analysis of flood risk. So there are, so far in our analysis of flood risk for under task 2, there have been a number of data sets that we've used. We've talked about a number of these already in our past meetings. Just to recap, there's the FAFDS layer, which stands for First American Flood Data Services. That's basically an old or digitized version of old FEMA maps, hard copy FEMA maps. Outside of El Paso County, there's also we're also planning to utilize the Fathom data set, and there's different versions, including one from summer 2021. That was the original 30-meter data set. There was an updated version that was released by TWDB, 3-meter resolution in the fall 2021. And then around the same time frame, I believe, I think the version is the same day, but we just actually received a copy of this, the 4th data set here, which is Fathom 30-meter resolution, an updated version. So we're looking at all these different options. And during our December 16th General Planning Group meeting, we discussed how our current approach is to utilize the 3-meter resolution in a few strategic areas, depending on where we've identified FMPs previously throughout the region. And then for a region-wide analysis, we're going to potentially use an updated version of the 30-meter Fathom data set, which has an advantage for our region in particular because of our region size. The 30-meter resolution is much more manageable to use at a region-wide scale. So I guess we can skip a couple slides here. The next slides are just kind of pointing out the different types of layers that we just discussed. So when we're talking about FMEs, there's really 2 considerations related to flood risk. And this discussion is primarily intended for outside of El Paso County, where the flood mapping data is where there's less detail available. So there's going to be two considerations. The first consideration would be an FME that fills data gaps from missing data. For example, areas in the region that don't have any current FEMA flood mapping. Even that FAFDS layer that we mentioned previously has gaps in it, and there are a number of communities that just don't have any current flood mapping information that's performed from a local study. Now, there is the Fathom data set, of course, which is more recent and does cover the whole region and does fill those data gaps. But the Fathom data set is developed using very generalized assumptions, hydrologic assumptions, may not always be the most appropriate data source for a specific location, but it's good at a region-wide level. So when we're looking or talking about potential FMEs, the first group of FMEs could include areas where we can develop flood studies that do not have current FEMA flood maps, and that would be informed by the latest available Fathom flood risk data. So this is a list here of those communities, and those are also shown on the previous slide in the red coloring. So these communities could be, we could have an FME outlined for each of these communities to just potentially do a more detailed flood study to verify the Fathom flood risk data and to better refine the flood risk in those locations. The second consideration for an FME outside of El Paso County are communities that have high potential flood risk based on the latest available information, whether it's the FAFDS layer or one of the Fathom 30-meter or 3-meter data sets. So for these lists, for these communities, we are looking at them currently with the latest available data. This analysis is still ongoing, so I should mention that the numbers on this slide are subject to change, as well as the maps. But we do have, we can use these preliminary data to develop our initial list of potential FMEs. So looking at this, looking at it from a region-wide perspective, the table on the right shows preliminary counts of buildings within one of the floodplains, whether it's the FAFDS or the Fathom floodplain. And these are counts of buildings for each of the communities. Taking the top communities with structures greater than 100 and removing El Paso and City of Socorro from that group because they're sort of already included in a lot of the previous discussions, or they also have a lot of more recent mapping. So taking those top cities, we've included those here in the next slides to just sort of show a detailed look at what those communities look like and what the FME might, how the FME might improve flood risk. So on the next slide, we'll just go through this briefly. These are kind of in sequential order according to the table. So we have the city of Alpine, and this area is a lot of the current projected flood risk is based on our Fathom data set. So again, an FME here could potentially refine that estimate of impacted buildings for future flood planning purposes. So I should also mention that the idea of FMEs in this context is not necessarily to produce regulatory FEMA maps, but rather to inform or identify potential strategies or projects for each specific community. So in the city of Alpine, for example, if we were to reevaluate this specific area, that the study that comes from that might be beneficial to help identify specific projects to mitigate flooding along the center part of the city that's shown as potential risk from the Fathom data set. On the next slide, we'll look at Presidio. This area is actually unique among the different communities. We've talked a lot about it, the potential flood risk here based on historical flooding. But actually the Fathom data set doesn't show much flooding here, just again, because of some limitations in the modeling methodology. Whereas the FEMA, the old FAFDS layer does show quite a lot of flooding where along the Rio Grande and along the northwest part of the city. So again, the city of Presidio is a good example of how additional projects, additional FMEs may be beneficial to look at a specific area more closely and sort of understand based on the Fathom data set and or the FAFDS layer what the actual or what a refined flood risk estimate might look like. And the next slide, the city of Sonora, again, this is a Fathom, an area that's predominantly represented by the Fathom layer. The next slide. Well, actually, I believe the city of Sonora also has some detailed mapping, if I remember correctly. And then city of Balmorhea. We can just go through these quickly. So just to kind of show, the city of Del City is fully within the FAFDS layer. City of Pecos has some impacted buildings from the Fathom data set, kind of in the northeast part of the city. City of Kermit is also another city that shows potential impacts from the Fathom data set, but not in the FAFDS layer. Town of Clint, this is actually covered within some more recent mapping within El Paso County. So has a high number of potential buildings at risk, but we do have more recent information there. So whether or not that's a beneficial FME is we can talk about that. And then city of Barstow, this is actually the primary flood zone here is the FAFDS floodplain, in which most of the city is overlapping. The next slide, city of McCamey, which is primarily showing flooding from the Fathom data set. And then lastly, the the town of Van Horn, which is showing some potential flood risk from the Fathom data. So these are just potential FMEs that we we have on our radar. I don't know if we necessarily need to vote to recommend any specific FMEs on these at this point, given that we're still going through our detailed risk analysis as part of task 2, but just wanted to show some examples of these FMEs that would be based on flood risk and not necessarily from our past conversations. Does anyone have any questions on any of this? All right, Chris, I think.
All right, thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, I will, and Brian, I don't know if you wanted to formulate sort of a general FME that we could include at the end of this presentation that kind of deals with all those in general. We can maybe consider that, but otherwise we can pretty that up in another meeting, but I'll leave that up to you. And the next part of this presentation, we want to talk about potential topical areas of flood-related risk that I mentioned earlier in the agenda part of the presentation, where there are a couple big issues in our region that we haven't talked too much about yet. First one is dam safety, and the second one is TxDOT roadway projects. And so I wanted to bring those up in this meeting. We know that the TCEQ, Texas Commission of Environmental Quality, has identified 106 dams. These are all approximate numbers. This was based on a list of dams that were given, and we sorted them by county. So we know that there are some counties that are partly within our region and partly within other regions. So we haven't gone through yet and figured out exactly which ones are split between two different regions. So I say approximately with all these numbers. They're subject to minor changes, but they should be in the ballpark. We know that there are about 106 dams within our region. 27 of those have been identified by the TCEQ as hydraulically inadequate. And so that means that there is a study that was done, and that was based on the judgment of the inspections that were done, and the evaluations, where there are some alternatives that have been considered for rehabilitation of these dams. And we are in the process of coordinating with TCEQ to basically, we've requested those reports, but at this time they cannot share those. So we have to coordinate directly with the dam owners to try to get those reports and figure out the details of why they were hydraulically inadequate and what other alternatives have been considered for those dams. So that's something that's on our list of things that we're planning on doing, is reaching out to those landowners. But we also know that there are an additional 28 dams within the region where the hydraulic adequacy is not determined according to TCEQ. And we tried to get a little bit more information about what goes into that classification as not determined. And that could be because the proper HH modeling has not been conducted yet to determine if it's hydraulically adequate. Sometimes there are configuration issues where maybe the current dam or spillway size is no longer consistent with the last study that was done. If there were significant changes to drainage area upstream of the dam, or the upstream channel leading to it, or if there's uncertainty with whether the dam could still safely pass the design storm without significant erosion. These are all issues, and there are other issues that could relate to it being not determined. But as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we did have an FME related to this, evaluate improvements for hydraulically inadequate dams in the region. And so we did list 27 here, but this could change. We might consider modifying this to not only look at those 27, but maybe look at the additional 28 that are not determined. And so the next couple slides kind of look at what is the other information that we know to help prioritize, which of these dams are the biggest priority in our region. So we also know that there is a category in the list of TCEQ dams for condition. We know 4 of them within the region are in poor condition, 36 are in fair condition, 53 are in good condition, and 13 do not have a rating for their conditions. So that's just another category that we can consider when trying to prioritize which of these hydraulically inadequate dams are the most important for our region. There's also this hazard classification, which we know that there are some limitations to what information can be shared publicly. Like we can't disclose what are the hazard classifications for specific dams, but based on information provided from NRCS and TCEQ, we were able to, as part of the state flood assessment, which occurred in 2018, where it was sort of the precursor to the state flood plan, there was some research that we did at that time. And now some of this could have changed, but at that point in time, it looked like there were 2 dams where the hazard classification was changed from low to significant. In others where another 2 dams where it changed from significant to high, and 4 dams were changed from low to high. And what this means is that when the dam is first constructed, there is a hazard classification based on whether there's development downstream or not. And so in a lot of these cases, these dams were built in the 1950s or 60s, and they are reaching their sediment pool design life at this point, which was typically around 50 years or so at the time they were constructed. And so it is possible, and we know that it's the case in several dams where development has occurred downstream. There's not a lot of regulations on who can develop downstream of a certain dam. So there are situations all throughout Texas where there was not a lot of development downstream of the dam when it was built, so it might have been a low hazard at the time, but then development came in downstream, which could raise the classification to high hazard. And as we mentioned, since a lot of these are reaching their design life, it's important to prioritize, which one of these started out as low, but now they've become high hazard. And that means that there's population at risk downstream of these dams. So these are just some categories that we are also considering using to prioritize these 27 dams that are associated with that FME. Are there any thoughts from subcommittee on, or stakeholders on, whether they have any strong opinions about any of these categories, or this FME in particular, if we need to expand it to also include the 28 dams that are where the hydraulic adequacy is not determined? I'll just leave it open here for a minute if anyone has any comments.
Chris, for those dams that are in Hudspeth County, I think I might have missed it if you mentioned it, but which of those dams that Hudspeth County brought up as issues, under which category are they at? Are they in the inadequate or not determined?
I think it's a mix, if I remember correctly. I think that some are hydraulically inadequate, and some and others might not be. Off the top of my head, I don't have that right in front of me, but yeah, that's something we can discuss offline if you like.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put that into the meeting topics when we're discussing that other project, the Riverside Regulating Reservoir. We'll kind of talk about it all once.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, this was a slide that could be. We'll discuss which dams we recommend in the next meeting after we've kind of gone through this list. If there aren't any issues with prioritizing according to those other categories, we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll have more information at that time. As we can answer, how many of those are in Hudspeth or other counties. But basically, one of the changes that we are considering making to that is that FME number 13, which I mentioned, potentially changing the wording to say conduct assessment and evaluate rehabilitation improvements for selected regional dams identified by TCEQ as hydraulically inadequate or not determined. Are there any issues with that change to that FME?
Looks good.
All right. Okay. Moving forward, then we want to talk about some TxDOT data. We know that there is a lot of information out there through the TxDOT websites, and we just want to make sure that we're using that in the best way. We didn't have a lot of TxDOT projects in our tech memo because we were waiting to receive some information from them at the time we were preparing that. We did have a few projects and studies from TxDOT that we knew about directly because we had worked on those. For example, this FM 170, we know that that's an ongoing conceptual study in the Presidio and Brewster County area. There are some improvements to cross culverts that are currently being evaluated at this time. We also included there's as FMPs, I should say, we have this SH20 project that we know was a TxDOT project in El Paso that we worked on. And there's this other FM 170 project that was completed. And in that study, there were 9 crossings and 163 low water crossings that were on FM 170 between Candelaria and US 67, Candelaria and US 67. So there's a small number of TxDOT projects, but we know that there's a lot more out there in the region. And so we're trying to come up with ideas for how to use that information and what about these TxDOT projects would qualify it to be considered in this regional flood plan, right? Because there are a lot of roadway projects that are primarily based on mobility, and they all have drainage components, but are they really flood mitigation projects? So how do we prioritize those for the purposes of this regional flood plan, I guess, is the question that we kind of wanted to discuss here. We do know that there is we have some goals that were discussed in the Subcommittee 1 meetings with Brian Blaisdell and that subcommittee. These are included in the tech memo number 1 and, or I guess 1401, 0001, and 2 here. But they have to do with removing 40% of the low water crossings from the 10% annual chance floodplain as a short-term goal within 10 years. And as a long-term goal, removing 90% of the low water crossings in our region from the 10% annual chance floodplain. So we know that that's an important issue to this subcommittee. And we know that there's a lot of crossings, a lot of low water crossings. We did an analysis, and Brian, I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe you might have it handy as to the total number of low water crossings we identified. But we did identify some and included those in our geodatabase for the tech memo. And those were identified by looking at the floodplains best available that we have at this time, and where they cross certain roadways. And then we looked at aerial imagery to confirm that there were low water crossings at those locations. And there are quite a number of them. I don't know, Brian, do you happen to have that number handy off the top of your, something accessible?
I can look it up and put it in the chat.
Okay, that'd be great. But basically, we want to think about ways to prioritize those. We know that there are bridge class crossings. Now, we don't have any goals specific to bridges at this time. That doesn't mean we cannot add a goal related to bridges, but we know that there's 2,520 bridge class crossings within our region. That's based on information that's on the TxDOT website, spatial data that's available. And some of these are likely low water crossings. When I say bridge class crossings, that means that it's either a bridge or it is a certain width that qualifies a culvert as being a bridge class culvert. So I think it's either 25 or 50 feet wide off the top of my head. I'm not remembering at the moment, but there's a lot of them in the region. And we know that one of the digital attributes associated with these bridges is a category called waterway adequacy. And we did talk with some folks at TxDOT that said there might be certain scores within this classification that could be used to identify, the highest priorities. So depending on whether it's a minor collector or local road or principal arterial, this waterway adequacy score has different meanings, but you can see that it can tell you if it's occasional or frequent overtopping of the bridge deck. And if there's frequent overtopping, the roadway approaches with significant traffic delays, occasional overtopping. So we are considering using, I think one of the scores that was thrown out there with our conversation with TxDOT was a value of 6 or lower might categorize something that we might want to focus on. So we just want to bring this up and see if there are any comments or thoughts that you all have about maybe using this to sort of narrow down that number of bridges or low water crossings that we're going to focus on. Another tool that we have available is we know that there are a spatial file. There's a spatial file on the TxDOT website that has, it's basically a line file that has all of the TxDOT roadway projects. And several of those say that they're already in construction. So we kind of threw those out. And then some of them weren't really related to drainage at all, like if they're just resurfacing the roadway. So we threw those out. And what we were left with was this list of roadway projects. And these are planned future projects by TxDOT. So, we're also going to be using this information spatially so when we identify certain low water crossings, we can see, okay, is there a TxDOT roadway that's planned for this crossing? Will it be, improved anytime soon? Is it on the radar? Or is it something that, we need to identify and bring to the attention of TxDOT? And so that's another just data source that we are using when we're doing our low water crossings to figure out, basically further define an FME that will help us meet those goals that I mentioned earlier about 40% removal of the 10% annual chance storm within the first 10 years.
Chris, I put in the chat. We previously identified about 1,200 low water crossings at risk in the region. I put some screenshots in the chat from our previous Subcommittee 1 meeting that shows sort of the general extent by HUC 8.
Okay, yeah, let me just pull that up here. So thanks, Brian. That gives us an idea of number of low water crossings. The darker the color here, the higher the number of low water crossings. And again, this was a desktop analysis based on our best available floodplains at that time. We're getting some updated floodplain information. So these are still subject to change, but it kind of gives you an idea of where we have the most of them. All right. And now I'll just talk, another information source from TxDOT are TxDOT studies within the region that are ongoing. And there was a big list of studies to choose from. And we looked through all of them and kind of filtered them down to the ones that you see here and that we thought were most relevant to the flood plan. Some of them have studies that have already been completed, like reports or feasibility studies that may have recommendations in them. Others, they didn't have that available. They just had some notes from public meetings. But this is just another resource when we're looking at that low water crossings. We'll want to see, okay, maybe there's not a planned project here, but has there been a study here, or is there a planned study that's going to be considering this? And that'll also go into that meeting that goal, a general FME related to those low water crossings. You know, we have the reimagined I-10, which we know, you know, I-10 corridor is a big study or strategy that Jeff had pointed out from the needs that we talked about earlier with the stakeholders. So, you know, Alameda, Donovan, these are all areas within El Paso. But then there's also other corridor studies like I-20, which goes through Pecos. So again, we just wanted to make you all aware that there are some studies on the TxDOT website where you can research more about these projects, and we're going to be using these again to mainly address that low water crossings. But if there's any other goals, like if we want to consider a bridge, you know, anything related to bridges or anything else related to roadway projects, I just wanted to bring it up here in case anyone had any strong opinions or recommendations related to that. All right. So lastly, we'll wrap it up here. It should be pretty close to the end, but we don't want to spend too much time on this because we think this probably warrants a separate meeting where we will talk about some of these ideas of coming up with studies or strategies that address the priority issues from TWDB. These are things that these are categories that we know when they become a project eventually, this is what would get them a high score if we pay attention to these certain categories. And so we want to make sure that we're well balanced, that we have considered other projects that maybe might not have a primary component of flood mitigation, but maybe it has a water supply benefit, maybe it has multiple benefits. And for each one of these bullets here, there's basically a scorecard that is in the Exhibit C guidance from TWDB, and you can get a varying score depending on each one of these categories. And it tells you, what goes into developing that score in that guidance. And so we brought this up on one of our first Subcommittee 2 meetings, and just wanted to bring it up here again in case anybody had thoughts about any studies that might touch on some of these, such as nature-based solutions. We know that for the multiple benefits category, if you have recreation benefits such as trails or parks, transportation benefits like we just discussed, improved roads, bike paths, these are all things that would get points for being multiple benefits. And that kind of ties in a little bit to what we were talking about with Omar earlier. We know that project for the EPC WID number 1 has a water supply benefit. And so if we know that it would score highly in this category, and when you look at all the other categories, how high is it likely to score in each one of those and rank? That's something that we'll be talking about for each one of these projects as we start to get more into the details. So just something to keep in mind. We won't spend a lot of time on it. There's environmental benefits. Like I mentioned, that Rio Bosque category, the Rio Bosque project that I brought up earlier is one that we know it has environmental benefits, but we're not sure whether the flood mitigation benefits will be enough to warrant keeping it in the plan at this point. So those are all tough questions that we're going to be dealing with down the road as we start to really dig into the details of some of these projects. So we just want to bring it up, keep it in mind. Like I said, we'll have another discussion. Probably hope to get Jeff Bennett involved in that one. He shared a lot of information about environmental flows programs that have been in the works for years with the Mexico side of the US IBWC or the IBWC, and how they regulate flows there that could affect the Rio Conchos and flooding in the Presidio area, and also the Big Bend area. We know that there's a lot of sedimentation studies and monitoring that have been going on there. So we'll definitely want to get him involved in that discussion, and anybody else that you all think might be interested in that conversation, please feel free to invite them. We want to get as much public participation and stakeholders involved as possible. Any questions there about some of these categories, or any ideas related to studies or things that maybe weren't included in the tech memo that you think we should address? All right. Well, before we go back to this recommendations to vote, I wanted to cycle back. I found the email, Isela, from you with the final list, which we can post in here real quick and just make sure that we have it in these updated meeting materials. But does this look right to you, Isela?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And again, I apologize for that earlier, but one thing I'll just point out is, yeah, this list includes 14, but we added this 15th project because we recently had that meeting with the U.S. Army on Fort Bliss property, where they mentioned that they had recently done an environmental study for one of these projects that you all were interested in, excavating the Fort Bliss sump. And so that this is actually not in the stormwater master plan at this time. This is the only project on this list that's not in the stormwater master plan, but I went ahead and added it to the bottom of here because it sounded like it was a previous priority, but kind of got put on hold when we were waiting for the environmental assessment to be done by the Army. But since that's available now, I went ahead and added it to that list. You have any issues with that or any comments related to that?
Yeah, so the cost seems very low for the excavation of the entire sump.
Oh, really? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Great.
So
well,
that's something that we may need to, yeah, we may need to look at that.
You also have a typo in storage in that line. There's a typo in the line. Okay.
Yeah, just go ahead. And well, yeah, we'll just keep it in here for now, but I'll make a note that those are things that we'll have to address. All right. With that, if there's anything else, Brian, did you have any suggestions as far as a general FME related to all the flooding outside of El Paso County?
I think it would be better to present specific or recommend specific FMEs once we have a chance to compare them against our more recent flood risk data that we received from Aqua Strategies for the 30-meter fathom data set. So maybe at our next flood, maybe at our next subcommittee meeting, we can try to present that if we have that ready.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. All right. Well, with that, the only other thing I think that we didn't capture on here is this SOC4 that we talked about, adding a, I'll just mention parentheses here, add SOC4, which was the EPC WID #1 project for the Moncato Arroyo that is in the county stormwater master plan that wasn't on this list. We've got the updated, corrected version of EP Water's top priorities here. And I'll also point out that I updated these two slides to have the most recent version that was sent out to everybody. And there was a couple little typos. I think this last line here for San Elizario, I think it said Socorro instead. So those have been corrected. So basically, I have this presentation that has all of our latest updates on it. Is there anything else that we wanted to add for voting to approve any refinements to this list of FMEs and FMSs included in the January 7th tech memo, resulting from discussions of this subcommittee meeting? Do we maybe need to clarify here approval of updated El Paso Water and El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan prioritized projects?
Chris, this is Annette. Just to verify, this this item will then go before the full group at the next flood planning meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I would just ask, I think, if I remember correctly, Richard corrected us just to include in the motion that we are approving to recommend this item to the full committee, since the subcommittees are recommending and the full group is the one who approves. So if I can just, when we're ready to make that motion, if we can just add that recommendation into the motion.
Right. Okay. So potential approval for refinements. Subcommittee meeting, we'll just say approval of.
I mean, at the very end, you can say to recommend to the flood plotting group.
It says that in the title, that potential subcommittee recommendations for vote.
Yes, but just, that's what the heading is, but when we make the motion, if we just make sure we have that in there.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually I took out that little piece about updating that list of projects from the city and the county, because I think that's technically an FMP issue. So we're going to approve that in our next FMP subcommittee too. So I think what we have here is probably sufficient for our purposes. I guess the only other topic that we may or may not want to add any language here is related to the discussion we had about having certain projects be both an FME and an FMP. And I think that we were in consensus that for stormwater master plan projects, everyone seemed to be in agreement that it was appropriate to include the projects as both FMPs and FMEs. And I guess to clarify that, I would say appropriate to include projects that do not get fully evaluated or fully evaluated as part of the FMP. Sorry, as part of the RFP, as both FMEs and FMPs. Does that sound like what we talked about? Is that, are there any tweaks to that wording? I guess the only question I'll bring up there is, you know, if we fully evaluate it as an FMP, does it still make sense to include it as an FME? Which to me, I don't think it does, because that means we've already done the evaluation and we've already come up with the FMP. So I think it would just be an FMP if we've evaluated it. Basically, if they're on that those two prioritized lists for the city and the county, and we do get through the full evaluation, then they would just be an FMP. If we do not get through that full evaluation, they would be both an FMP with all of this extra information that's not available will be left blank. And in addition, it will be an FME, so it'll be subject to funding for the study and for construction.
That sounds appropriate.
Thank you. And the only other, I guess, thing is if we wanted to type anything on here related to those projects outside of the El Paso City and County Stormwater Master Plans, sounded like that was still kind of a gray area. I would probably just punt on that one for now until we get a little bit further, a little bit more information. But we might have a follow-up discussion where we first rank those projects outside of the county and city stormwater master plans, and then kind of decide what to do with those from there. But it seemed like it might be a little bit early at this point to make any decisions related to these projects. Does everyone agree, or are there any strong preferences? We know that this is a high priority for EPC WID number 1. Are there any other projects that stand out as really high priorities to make sure that we rank them very high when we're going through, which ones will we evaluate as part of this regional flood plan?
So my question is on number 2. That's the Waco Bolton artificial recharge. Is that one being considered under the regional water plan or no?
Yes.
Do you know?
Yes, both of these are recommended in the state water plans and the regional water plans. Or I know they're recommended in the regional water plans. Yeah, the most recent one, which is a requirement if we can say that they have a water supply benefit, they have to be in those regional water plans. So those are the only 2 that we have that have water supply benefits.
Okay, yeah, because definitely number 2 is very important to SREP water as well.
Okay. That's good feedback. And we know that in general, what's been brought up at the previous subcommittee meetings and general RFPG meetings is that it's important to show equality throughout the region. We don't want everything to be in the El Paso area. We know that that's where our biggest population is, and there's a lot of flood risk there. But we want to show that we've evaluated the whole region. So we're going to try to really prioritize all of these, since there's only 9 of them at this point. Outside of those stormwater master plans, and hopefully we'll get a few more during these upcoming open house meetings coming up on February 9th in Pecos, City of Pecos, and February 10th in Presidio. We hope to get a lot more feedback and coordination that hopefully we can add to this list. But as of right now, we're trying to prioritize as many of these as possible. But I don't think we need to spend any more time on that at this point. That's probably more of a discussion for the FMPs, but we just wanted to bring it up because, like I mentioned, some of these might eventually become FMEs or FMSs if they don't have enough information. So we'll leave it at that for now. And I guess I'll hand it back over to Annette if she wants to lead the discussion on the vote. And then we'll just talk about the next subcommittee meeting dates after that, and we'll be done.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. If I can get Gilbert and Omar to have your cameras on, and then I would ask if somebody would want to make a motion as presented on the screen. I see Sela and Sal. Okay, there we go. So if whoever of the group would want to make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve for, what is it, for stormwater projects? You had written the other recommendation. Can you put it up? Oh, those are the ones. I'm sorry. Yes. So approve to make a recommendation of any refinements to list of FMEs and FMSs included in 1722 tech memo resulting from discussions in the subcommittee meeting to recommend to the Upper Rio Grande Regional Flood Planning Group.
And then do you also want to include the second part in terms of the
We included, we
master
included with the
projects?
same one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. And to include for stormwater projects, to include projects that do not get fully evaluated as part of the RFP and as both FMEs and FMPs.
That's your full
Okay, and then,
motion?
Sal, who gave the second?
I didn't catch that. Who gave the second?
I don't think they haven't given the second yet.
Okay, so that's why I was calling, have a full motion now from Isela.
Oh.
So we
Yes,
need to hear a second.
That can come either from Omar or Gilbert.
Can we hear a second, you guys, on the motion?
Second. Sorry about that.
Okay, so we have a second, motion and a second. Anybody in opposition to this motion to recommend to the flood planning group this item? Hearing none, motion passes. Annette?
Okay, so yes, sir. So for agenda item 12, Chris, how soon would you want to have another meeting for subcommittee 3?
So it's up to the group here. I think that we have a lot of what we need here to get the ball rolling on some of these evaluations. So we thank you for that. I know that, as I mentioned, the February 9th and 10th are the public meetings, and we're targeting in Pecos on the 9th and Presidio on the 10th, and we're targeting that prior week, the 31st through the 4th, for the next general RFPG meeting. Brian, do you see any issues with having this this next subcommittee 3 FMS meeting after those public meetings? To me, it seems like that would be a good, I guess, milestone, is to get past those public meetings and have a little bit of time to update our FMEs, FMSs. And so, I'm thinking the week of the 21st through the 25th of February as our following meeting. Are there you see any issues with that, Brian, at this point? Or
no, I don't see any issues.
Okay, Gilbert, you see any from? Is Gilbert on the call? I'm not sure if he joined.
Yeah, I'm on the call. Y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't see any.
So what I can do then, Chair, is I can go ahead and send out a doodle poll to see which date works out best. But we'll be looking at the 21st through the 25th.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess one other milestone to keep in mind is there is going to be another submittal, the second part of that tech memo, which will mostly be a GIS submittal, and that's, I think, going to be due March 9th. Is that right, Brian? Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I think so.
It's early March.
Early March, yeah.
So that would put us, about 2 weeks before that. So I think that would be, maybe just to be safe and give us a full 2 weeks beforehand. Can we say between the 17th and the 22nd?
Okay. Okay, I'll send out the poll for the 17th through the 22nd. Is that what you said?
Yeah, you know what though, then, sorry, I'm just thinking from the perspective of, since we're going to be in the public meeting on the 10th, and we don't typically do these meetings on Fridays. Yeah, we'll just stick to the original plan. I'm sorry, the 21st through the 25th would probably be the best.
Okay, well, I'll go to the 25th Friday or Thursday?
25th is Friday.
Okay, so I'll go up to the 24th then?
We could, yeah, we can do the 24th.
Okay, I will do that. And then if you see on agenda item 13, it's a repeat of 12, so I apologize. That was my mistake for including that double entry. So Subcommittee Chairman Masood, if you'd like, we could ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Okay, then I would assume that no one's making that everyone's in agreement. So we can go ahead and adjourn, and it's now 3:15.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.